Mormon Mental Health Podcast is a production of the Open Stories Foundation and relies on donations from its listeners like you. To help keep this podcast alive, please consider becoming a monthly subscriber. Any amount will make a difference. You can click the right-hand donate button on MormonMentalHealth.org. All contributions are tax-deductible within the United States and go towards podcast production and building community support and program development for Mormons on various paths and journeys. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Mormon Mental Health. This is Natasha Helper Parker, and I've got some exciting things happening. I hope you think they're exciting. I am starting to invite some providers to help me host this podcast so that we can create more content. And I've got several people kind of, in the works. And today I thought I would spend some time introducing you to one of the new hosts of Mormon Mental Health. But before we go there, I'm going to just give a few announcements of things that are coming up. I know people are always a little curious about things that I'm up to and want to know where I'm presenting and such. So just FYI, I will be running a faith transitions retreat in Oklahoma City. So Midwesterners, show up. It's kind of fun to do things that are not necessarily always in Utah or in the Mormon Belt. So Oklahoma City, if you're interested, it's going to be September 13th and 14th. And you can find all the information for that on my website, natashaparker.org. to help you figure out, registration, things of that nature. We're excited to have you come if you can. Another thing that's happening is an event called Thrive Day 2019 on November 17th. I've been asked to be one of the presenters at this conference. It's also for those who are wanting support post a faith transition or are in the middle of a faith transition or maybe are in a mixed faith marriage per se. It's going to be an entire day's event. It has donor support, so it's only $15 to go. It's going to be hopefully super helpful and affordable for people. This will be in the Salt Lake City area. That is another event that you can find also on my website, natashaparker.org. So I think that's mainly it. I am running sex therapy trainings with the Bachelor Institute in California. I'll be out there in November. If anybody's interested in that kind of a route, please contact me if you're, a therapist who maybe wants to go the route of becoming certified as a sex therapist. So those are all things that I can offer. All right, without further ado, Mormon Mental Health Podcast, as you all know, is reliant on support from listeners. So it can only survive and do well if I have listener support. I get a lot of really great feedback about the topics and guests that come on the show, and so many of you do already support in one way or another, so thank you for that. But if you have been listening for a while and enjoy the content and want to see Mormon Mental Health survive, please consider a donation. And it can be a subscription type of donation where you just donate $5, $10, $50 a month, or it can be a one-time donation. Whatever you can offer would be greatly appreciated. I have obviously costs associated with a podcast, and now that I'm trying to bring on more people to be able to provide content, it would be nice to offer a small stipend. At this point, we're not able to do that, but it would be nice to be able to do that for people who dedicate their time and expertise to create the content on this podcast. And so I would just ask for your support. That would be great. There's a very easy donate button on the website, mormonmentalhealth.org, that makes it very easy to do so. We are part of a nonprofit, the Open Stories Foundation. So any donations that you make are tax deductible if that's something that matters to you, at least here in the United States. All right. So the person that I have on the show tonight is Jennifer Rooney White. And I'm so excited to have her on. So welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I was just, when I was thinking about inviting you to be one of the hosts for Mormon Mental Health, I was thinking about how I first kind of met you, or I guess heard of you. I heard of you before I met you. And one of the ways that I did that was through podcasting back in the day. It was
Yes.
like years ago when the Mormon podcast world was a little bit fairly new, and there weren't that many podcasts. There's a lot of them now. And I forget which podcast you were on, but you were on several as, again, kind of giving mental health expertise. And I remember listening to you going, this person sounds, fairly reasonable in her approach. Sounds fair to the many issues that we have going on. And so I reached out to you, and because that was about the same time that I was founding the Mormon Mental Health Association, and asked you if you'd be interested in in that process and the goals and mission statements that we were coming up with, and whether you'd be even consider serving on the board. So that's how I first heard of you. Does that sound right to you?
It does. Yeah. And it was pretty cool that because I knew of you. So, but yeah, the fact that you already had this big name and that you had reached out was very exciting to be part of the beginning of that organization.
Oh, well, that's cool. I don't know that I had a great big name back then, but that's cool that you thought so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been a journey in of itself for many of us, many of our colleagues who helped us do that really tremendous work through the MMHA was a really fun project and continues to thrive. And I'm now the past president. I think you're the conference chair. Like we've both, stayed involved in one way or another throughout the many years that it's existed. So that's kind of neat.
Yes.
So I thought since I was inviting you to be a host that I would just kind of have you on to introduce yourself, have the public get to know you a little bit better. So why don't we just start off with maybe a slight recap of your Mormon story per se, like who are you? How do you get to know issues around Mormon cultural competence? How are you part of this community to begin with?
Okay. Yeah. Well, my mom is actually a convert, and my dad's actually an atheist. But my mom joined the church when I was about 2. This was when I lived in Connecticut, and it actually it's funny because there's not very many success stories using tracting, but that was, there were missionaries that were tracting, and that's how my mom got introduced to the church. So, yeah.
Okay. So then you've been kind of a member with her growing up ever since. Like she's been active, she stayed involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not only did tracting work, but retention worked.
Yes.
Is that right?
It totally did. Yes. Yeah. So growing up in the church, being active, going to seminary, all that stuff. Even as I got older, I went on a mission. So I went to the England-London mission. So that was an awesome experience. Yeah.
I can imagine. Very cool. Okay. And then where did you study? Where did you go to school?
So for my undergrad, I got my bachelor's at Utah Valley University, and then my master's I got at Brigham Young University.
And what was your undergraduate in?
Behavioral science.
Okay. So right off the bat, you were interested in the social sciences as far as the beginning of your educational journey?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting how that kind of happened. Because I was actually that was where I graduated, but this can get to be kind of a complicated story because I took several breaks.
As far as in your academic journey, you mean?
Yes, sure. Yes. There was my mission, and then there was getting married and all that stuff where there's breaks. But I started at a community college in California. So, and it was my first year of that I realized that I really wanted to be a therapist. It just took me a lot longer to get there.
Well, what played into that? What made you realize that?
So this is a very Mormon answer. I was watching General Conference, and I was watching the in between. LDS Family Services had a little special about what they did and everything, and I was like, I want to be involved with that. It just looked beautiful and amazing, and realized like, oh yeah, therapy really can make a big difference in people's lives, and it really appealed to me.
Wow, that's super cool.
So Yeah, which hasn't ended up where I work or anything, and quite a different journey since then, but that's where it started.
Well, that's really neat. So you go and get your degree in behavioral science from Utah Valley, and then get accepted to the BYU social work program.
Yes, yeah.
And that's no easy feat. I mean, that's a distinguished degree for sure. That I mean, they only accept how many people do they accept per year into that program?
About 40.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty, yeah, not easy to get into. Great program.
Can you
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about that? Like, what was the program like? What types of things did you necessarily like focus on? Have any focus and as part of that, or was it a general degree in social work?
There is a big focus on doing therapy. So they set up several internships for us. So that was a big part of it. As well as they expected us to do a big research project. So I was able to get published through that. But I know most of the classes had to do with doing therapy.
Okay.
So whether
So
in
very
different
clinical in focus.
focuses, different clinical, yeah, yeah, some couples therapy classes. They even offer a sex therapy class, which it is a brief introduction, but at the time I thought, oh yeah, this is great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then
And what? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
since then I've gotten a lot more education through ASECT,
As far as the sex therapy field
sex
is
therapy.
concerned, so
Yes.
that's an area that you're very interested in, as
Yes, it
far as
is.
continuing education in that
Yes.
regard. Can I ask what your research was on as far as at BYU?
Yeah. So it was around parenting and the socialization of religiousness and spirituality.
Trying to look at what type of question?
So this was a pretty big project where like we were taking a lot of different measures. I like had was part of writing one of them, but really kind of looking at what religious behaviors in the family they were doing, what that would look like as far as retention after kids leave. And certainly I have different opinions on this now than I did then, but
Well, do you want to talk
um,
a bit about that? Like, what were you wondering or looking for? And was this a class project or was this your own personal research?
so we had, as part of my research class, we had to do this, but I ended up having, I'm trying to think of the right, like I was a research assistant, and so I was working with another professor, and that this was his focus.
Okay, so you were helping a
So
professor with this particular research project, which then counted for
yes,
your qualifications for your degree.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so and he was interested then in looking at what types of religious practices might be in a home environment that would help or detract from people staying in their religious tradition that they grew up with.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things when in doing a lot of the research for it, before actually we did the study, the thing I found most interesting is people were more likely to stay in any religious tradition if they had room to doubt and room to question within the religious context. Because if they didn't, they were going to find that somewhere else.
Interesting. How did that come to be something that you figured out?
Just through reading a lot of the literature.
Literature,
Yeah.
right. That is super interesting. And so when you say that you had a different perspective on it then than now, what do you mean by that?
I I mean, I guess if there's just I have more of a fluid, or I guess more of an minded perspective. You know, I mean, especially like right after my mission, like, I felt more like, oh, staying in the LDS church, I mean, this is going to be the best thing for everyone. Whereas now I'm like, we each have our individual journeys, and that works beautifully for some people. And then other people, um, you know, that they have a different journey, and that is just as amazing and just as wonderful. And just appreciating diversity rather than, figuring out, oh, how do we keep people just in this one path?
So with the emphasis maybe back then being, oh goody, we're going to figure out how to help people stay.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, just wanting, having that good intent of like, oh, I just want people to be the happiest. But now realizing I'm not the expert on anyone else's life.
And that there's
So,
different paths for different types of happiness for different people,
exactly.
and even encompassing spirituality.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. Weren't you also involved? Help remind me, because I know that we've talked about this at times throughout our friendship together. Weren't you involved in some type of development of training materials or something along those lines for bishops or ecclesiastical leaders in regards to mental health?
Yes.
Was
Yeah.
that part of this program as well?
Yeah. In our policy class, we had to do a big project, and there's about 20 of us that were involved with this. And some of us can try to keep it alive and continue with it for a couple years after we graduated too. But it's called Clergy Bridge. And we basically our goal was to kind of bridge the gap between clergy and mental health professionals and to offer free trainings to clergy for any religion. And we did this out, here in Utah. So, um, and as well as we made a manual that's pretty basic that goes over some of the myths of mental health and domestic violence, substance abuse, and then kind of it's meant for leaders. So our clergy, so for example, so bishops can know like, okay, this would be a good time to refer, this is what you can do. So it's training around that. Crisis intervention was one of the topics that we gave training on because they deal often they will hear about the crisis before maybe a therapist will, and
Sure.
so they can kind of know how to deal with that immediately and then refer.
So this was obviously not something put out by the church or that ever was like officially adopted, but at the time that you and your colleagues were developing it, you did give these materials out to certain, like what, like example wards or things of that nature to how they'd be received, or did it even get that
Yeah.
far?
So we had a couple conferences. We had like a yearly conference, and I think we had only about two or three. And at that, we printed out a bunch of the manuals and gave those out. I know that I've in a lot of the wards that I've been in, I've given them to my bishops. I still have the PDF that I give out
Is that
often.
something that if somebody contacted you after listening to this podcast, you'd be able to share?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay. What's the best way to contact you?
That's a good question. So, probably I guess my email or through Facebook.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And we'll link to your email then as part of this podcast, and Facebook Messenger you at Jennifer Rooney White, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, great. So you go ahead and graduate then, I guess, eventually from
Hmm.
your program. And
Yes.
what have you been doing since?
So, when I did before graduating, I had several great internships. So, one of the things I did is I was able to work like at the mental health hospital.
So inpatient type of treatment.
Yes. Yes. So that was one of my main ones, as well as working at the BYU clinic. But yeah, after graduating, I started out teaching at Utah Valley University as an adjunct.
And before we go into that, how would you grade the program, BYU's social work program at the master's level, in regards to overall training, and also kind of like one of my main concerns is ethical ramifications of the interplay between religious belief, institutional belief, and mental health treatment?
Um, I feel like they did a really good job. It's such a different experience. I mean, I didn't go to my undergrad for BYU, but I've heard how different of an experience it is. Master's level is a little more open-minded. At social work, especially, we get into more liberal topics, as well as uh, they really had a big emphasis of like, you are not a missionary as a therapist, and really separating that. So I appreciated that they did have a good professional focus. Definitely,
Right.
as well as I feel like they really emphasized, and it was funny to me because I didn't realize that it had to be emphasized, but apparently they thought it was so important to emphasize that like you never go to report anyone for not obeying the honor code
Okay.
as
Right.
a therapist. Like you just not never, which seems logical, but they definitely emphasize things like that are
So
important.
meaning, yeah, the work was confidential in the counseling center. And I've heard really good things about the BYU Counseling Center in Provo. So sounds like your program probably was part of that kind of mentality of making sure that confidentiality is honored,
Yes.
which is a big concern at
Yeah.
BYU for sure. All right. So you go into teaching then. What led you to go that route versus jumping right into clinical work?
Probably, well, partly the year. A lot of therapists were it was just harder to find work.
Mhm.
A lot of people were being let go of some of the bigger organizations, and yeah, so it was just a little bit harder to find that. So I figured I would just get in with teaching, and
And what
I really
kinds of
enjoyed
classes
it.
were you teaching?
Psychology and social work. I really enjoyed, like, there's a general psychology class that I taught, positive psychology, which was a lot of fun, human sexuality, which I love teaching that. So those were some of my favorites.
Awesome. All right. And then you did eventually get back into clinical practice.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I ended up working at Valley Behavioral Health.
Okay.
So, and I was there for a few years. I was in the forensic unit where working with a lot of people who have um, broken the law in some form. I have some training in working with people in the domestic violence area, so with the offenders.
Okay.
And so I did a lot of that as well as substance abuse, often like court ordered treatment when people get certain charges they
Where
have
they
to
have
go
their
through.
kind of they're mandated to come see you
Yeah.
part of their
Oh, yeah.
as part of their, I guess, consequences or treatment or things of that nature.
Exactly.
So that's a fairly interesting population to work with, I would imagine. What's been your kind of either made challenges or favorite parts about working with populations like that?
I think one of the biggest surprises is just realizing being able to see good in all of my clients and their potential, and then often even the offenders, well, what they're doing is not okay. A lot of times it comes from a place of hurt, and that there is that humanity that maybe we all need.
Right, regardless of your situation or what's brought you to the table.
Yes.
Yeah. Super interesting. So, are you still involved in those types of kinds of settings, or are you moving on? I know that, I mean, part of our relationship too is that you work for Symmetry Solutions, which happens to be my
Yes.
online practice. So, you have
Yes.
like a side gig that you've got going on.
Yeah.
And what else are you currently doing?
So I'm also working at Sandy Counseling Center where I'm still running some of those groups for domestic violence offenders as well as substance abuse, but I'm also working with the victims also. Um, Utah has some good funding for that. Anytime there's like a DV contract where they're able to get funding and get therapy. Um, if there's been any kind of also if there's been any kind of crime against people. Um, and then I've just been doing there some couples counseling, a lot of individual counseling. A lot of it is issues around depression or anxiety, which is so common. I feel like most of us have dealt with this to some level,
Mhm.
so really relatable.
And since you work in a state where there's a high population of obviously of Mormons, do you see that the interplay between that at all with the issues that you're seeing, or do you think that would be the same whether they were Mormon or not, as far as the types of themes that come up in therapy or the types of issues that people are dealing with?
Oh, I definitely think it does look different. I mean, Utah is so um, it's pretty heavily populated with Mormons, and so I do have a lot of clients that are Mormons or have been affected by Mormons having like the more power in the state, I guess, and kind of their perspective on things and how that's affected them. And certainly, I mean, religion can play such a big part in people's lives. So when someone's dealing with anxiety, it might, we often talk about their experiences, and how religion has, either been a support or helped them, or how, or sometimes how it's maybe made that worse, with perfectionist culture. I see a lot of that. A lot of people feeling like they need to be perfect, and that can cause a lot of anxiety or depression.
When they don't feel like they're measuring up in some way or another.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm assuming Mormonism comes up quite a bit, even with those who aren't Mormon. Like you're saying, people are complaining or
Yeah.
talking about how they're being influenced by the majority of the people in their community being Mormon.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a lot of clients who have just shared how not being Mormon and growing up, how they just felt like they didn't fit in, or they were different, or other people weren't comfortable with them, you know, um, other parents weren't comfortable with them playing with their kids, and that there's this real divisiveness, which is interesting, like so fascinating to me, because I mean, I lived all over, and so like that's not something I'd really seen because I lived in Connecticut, Kentucky, northern Southern California. Those were the main places
You
before
never
living
grew
here.
up in a space that was primarily Mormon yourself.
No, no. In fact, the opposite actually once happened to me, and this was when I was in Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky. And there one of my friends, her mom, I remember sitting me down and talking to her, and she was so concerned because I was Mormon, and she just didn't think she could have me be friends with her daughter, and she just was like, "You could never mention anything about your religion to my daughter," and she was just so like, that was just, yeah, her
Wow.
to okay me as a friend. And then I come up out to Utah and find out that like this hurtful thing that was done to me, my own people are doing to other people. So
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of really upsetting.
Which really kind of finds the common denominator there is tribal dynamics, regardless of where we come from, right? That we can be very quick to otherize other populations, regardless of whether you're doing that as a Christian, a Mormon, a Muslim, whatever.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Well, so as you're moving forward, what are you? I know that you recently got your license, so that's an exciting
Yes,
step in a therapist's life, right? And
exactly. Yes, very excited.
congratulations. Yeah, congratulations on that. And do you want to talk a little bit about just the types of, work that you really enjoy doing, what you and maybe along with that kind of your vision of what you hope to bring to this podcast?
I am just so passionate about, and I love working with people that are dealing with either a faith transition or a faith crisis, um, and kind of helping them and through that. And I love working with that, as well as mixed faith marriage, where people, maybe one person in the marriage is having a faith crisis, and that doesn't mean that they have to end their relationship, and sometimes that's the right thing for people too. Um, but that one factor doesn't have to determine that. So, and the other area I'm really just excited about learning so much more about and have gotten a lot of training in, is as I'm working on becoming a certified sex therapist, with ASACT. And so really just working a lot with couples, in their relationships, as well as helping them improve their sex lives and just their potential to do that, and that a lot of people are dealing with a lot of sexual shame or just never really having the education and how much potential they really can have to improve that.
Yeah, and you've mentioned ASECT a few times, so just to let people know, that's American Association for Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. I probably messed that up a little bit, but
that sounds right to me.
That's the one kind of governing body that governs sex therapy accreditation in the United States that is at least nationally and internationally respected and renowned. So yeah, that's exciting. I'm super excited. We need as many, I think, sex therapists as we can in Mormon land as far as,
Yes.
helping people with, like you said, a lot of those themes that, even though I think there's a lot of sex positivity in Mormonism, there's also, like in any conservative upbringing, can be a lot of room for sexual shame and sex negative messages. I mean, that's true even just of our American culture at large. So I think we're all affected.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Having more and more professionals who are trained in that is just going to benefit everybody. So
yes.
really glad you're doing that. Yeah. And then as far as your, what you hope to kind of bring to Mormon Mental Health podcast.
Well, yeah, I think it'll be great to be able to interview and to talk about, the topics, different dynamics of mental health in Mormonism. And I still use the word Mormon and I guess LDS, but just kind of in our community, how different things are coming up and what's in the news, what's going on, as well as, people that are specialized in these different areas, being able to interview them and learn from them and have that available to the public.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's why I've loved this podcast so much too. It's an area that's still rife with taboo and kind of even shame in of itself. If you need mental health help, it feels a lot of times in our culture like that means that you're either weak or broken somehow, or not able to, pull yourself up by the bootstraps on your own. We have a lot of that even just in American culture that I think
Definitely.
makes it difficult for people to get the help that they need. I think we're doing a lot better through a lot of educational campaigns nationally, but I think, this is maybe one way we can do it more centered on our particular community that we grew up in and that we know about. And we're excited to serve you, the public, in this way, to bring topics that you might be dealing with in your family and your ward and your friendships, right? And have some working knowledge around issues that people are struggling with.
Yeah, and just to normalize, like we're all, when people are struggling, that's normal, and that there doesn't have to be this stigma. It's interesting because I worked with some people where it was really hard for them to share with some of their loved ones that they were going to therapy, which is such an individual thing. We don't have to share everything with people, but when they wanted to, and I just think it's so important to normalize that. To me, I'm more impressed with people that are going to therapy because you're dealing with your issues. I mean, how much better would the world be if like all of us would like go to therapy, deal with their issues, in some way.
Right.
So.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, I'm super excited to have you on. Thanks for kind of letting me dig into your, background and introduce you to everybody. I can't wait to see who you're able to bring on. And I think for those of you who are listening, you can probably expect Jen to probably do anywhere from 1 to 3 interviews a month. So that's going to highly increase, the amount of content we have, which will also help me not always feel like I'm behind, which I usually am. So I really appreciate your help, Jen, and you're to join me in this process.
You're welcome. I'm really excited to be part of this. I really am.
Yeah, well, it'll be super fun. So so hopefully you've enjoyed getting to know Jennifer White. She does great work. She has a lot of passions, like you've heard, about a lot of different topics, and helps support me and her and this whole process and of keeping this podcast alive and well by offering hopefully a donation. Any little bit will do. If everybody who listened to a podcast on Mormon Mental Health just gave $1 a month, we would be like having no fundraising issues. So it doesn't take a lot to have us be supported in a way that's financially sustainable. Take care, everybody. Have a great day. I hope all of you are able to prioritize your own mental health and well-being in ways that resonate for you. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Bye, Jen.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Mental Health Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us and become a monthly subscriber at mormonmentalhealth.org. The goals of this podcast include education, advocacy, and the mental health and general well-being of Mormons and their families. We can't further this work without your support. Music for this episode was provided by the Lower Lights.
Over life's tempestuous sea, chart and compass came from thee. Jesus, Savior, pilot me, unknown ways before me roll, hiding rock and treacherous show, chart and compass came from thee. Jesus, Savior, pilot me.
As a mother stills her child, thou canst hush the ocean wild, wondrous sovereign of the sea. Jesus, Savior, pilot me.
Boisterous wave, obey thy will.
Obey thy will.
When thou sayest to them,
Be still.
wondrous sovereign of the sea. Jesus, Savior, pilot me. When at last I near the shore, and the fearful breakers roar, may I hear thee say to me, fear not, I will pilot thee. Twixt me and the peaceful rest, then while leaning on my breast, may I hear thee say to me, fear not,